A cartoon should not be able to name a war 3 decades early. In 1996, a Simpsons joke mentioned an Ayatollah taking power in the Middle East. Then in 2026, a real war broke out between the US, Israel, and Iran. And a real Ayatollah was killed within hours. Fans went digging. What they found still has people talking. The episode that won't die. The episode is called Two Bad Neighbors. It aired on January 14th, 1996, as the 13th episode of Season 7. It was written by Ken Keeler and directed by Wes Archer. The plot has nothing to do with Iran at all. Former President George H.W. Bush and his wife Barbara move into the house across the street from The Simpsons, and Homer spends the entire episode trying to get even with him after Bush spanks Bart for bad behavior. The idea for the episode reportedly came from a real feud between the show and the actual Bush family, who had publicly criticized the cartoon years earlier for setting a bad example for American households. Former showrunner Bill Oakley has said he first came up with the idea roughly 2 years before it went into production, after George Bush made an offhand comment suggesting America should be more like the wholesome Waltons family and less like The Simpsons. Josh Weinstein, who ran the show alongside Oakley at the time, has said audiences often misread the episode's intentions entirely. Many viewers expected a pointed political attack on Bush, but the writers made a deliberate effort to keep the story personal rather than political. That same spirit carried into smaller background jokes throughout the episode, including the 15-second Ayatollah gag, which was written purely as a quick laugh rather than any kind of statement about foreign policy. The scene fans keep sharing happens during a neighborhood street sale, where Homer digs through a box of old junk trying to find things to sell. He pulls out a faded t-shirt that reads Ayatollah Asahollah, a joke shirt clearly made during the hostage crisis of the late 1970s, when 52 Americans were held at the United States Embassy in Tehran for 444 days. Marge tells him to get rid of it, pointing out that Ayatollah Khomeini, the man the shirt was mocking, died years earlier. Homer refuses to throw it away. He tells Marge the shirt still works on any Ayatollah, then rattles off a list of made-up names, Ayatollah Nakbadeh, Ayatollah Zahedi, before adding that, even as they speak, an Ayatollah named Razmara and his followers are consolidating power somewhere. That is the entire joke. It runs for roughly 15 seconds inside a 22-minute episode. Nothing in the scene names a real living Iranian leader. Nothing mentions the year 2026. Nothing mentions a war, a strike, or a death. The names Homer says are invented, written by the show's staff as generic-sounding stand-ins for a religious title Americans had heard constantly on the news since 1979. This year, a real war broke out between the United States, Israel, and Iran, and a real Iranian supreme leader was killed in the opening strike. And that coincidence sent the 30-year-old joke flying across social media all over again. Before getting into what people piled on top of that coincidence, it helps to look at exactly what the scene does and does not contain. Almost everything spreading online right now goes well beyond what Homer actually said on screen. What the scene actually shows and what it does not. Here is the honest breakdown. The episode uses the word Ayatollah several times as a punchline. That part is real, and it is the entire basis for the viral claim. Everything else being added on top of that clip online is not in the episode. The scene does not name Ali Khamenei, the man who was actually Iran's supreme leader in 2026. It does not name any real Iranian official at all. The three names Homer says, Nakbadeh, Zahedi, and Razmara, do not match any person who has ever held real power in Iran before or after 1996. It does not mention a strike, a bombing campaign, a war, or the United States military. It does not mention Israel. The joke is built entirely around the idea that Ayatollah is a title rather than one specific man, and that whoever holds it next will probably be another hardliner, which was already a fairly common observation about Iranian politics by 1996. Writers who worked on the show at the time have explained the joke plainly. The line exists because by 1996, jokes about Ayatollah Khomeini and the 1979 hostage crisis already felt dated to American audiences. So the writers built a gag around Homer, stubbornly insisting his old shirt was still relevant, no matter who held the title next. It is a joke about how long grudges last, not a prediction about any specific person or year. The real Ali Khamenei became Iran's supreme leader in 1989, 7 years before this episode aired, and he was already the internationally known face of the office by the time Homer made his joke. Fans circulating the clip in 2026 have widely claimed the episode somehow named Khamenei directly. It did not. Khamenei's name never appears in the script, the dialogue, or any visual in the scene. The confusion appears to come entirely from viewers assuming any joke about an Ayatollah must be about whichever Ayatollah happens to be in the news that week. It also helps to understand what the word Ayatollah actually means, since a lot of the confusion online seems to come from treating it like a name rather than a title. Ayatollah is a rank given to senior Shia religious scholars in Iran, roughly similar to how the word bishop describes a rank inside the Catholic Church rather than one specific man. Iran has had many Ayatollahs at the same time throughout its modern history, and only two of them, Khomeini and then Khamenei, have ever actually held the specific job of supreme leader since the 1979 revolution. So what people were actually reacting to was simple. A war did break out involving Iran in 2026, a real supreme leader really did die in it, and fans layered that real event onto an old, unrelated joke that happened to use the word Ayatollah more than once. That is a coincidence of vocabulary, not of substance, but the real war. Underneath all of it is what actually deserves attention: how the real war actually started. The real conflict has an official name. The United States called its operation Epic Fury. Israel called its side of the same campaign Roaring Lion. On February 28, 2026, American and Israeli forces launched a coordinated set of strikes against Iranian military and nuclear sites, hours after Iran had fired missiles toward Israeli territory earlier that same day. The stated goal, according to officials, was to destroy Iran's ballistic missile program, cripple its navy, and permanently stop the country from being able to build a nuclear weapon. The operation opened with enormous force. According to United States Central Command, more than 1,000 sites across Iran were struck within the first 24 hours alone. The attack involved B-2 stealth bombers, F-22 and F-16 fighter jets, A-10 attack aircraft, and electronic warfare planes designed to jam Iranian radar and communications. President Trump announced the strikes to the public through an 8-minute video posted on Truth Social at 2 a.m. Eastern Time, rather than through a formal address to Congress. His administration did notify congressional leaders through a required war powers briefing beforehand, but most Americans first learned about the operation from that video. The single most stunning outcome of the opening night came within hours. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had held the position since 1989, was killed in the first wave of strikes on a residence in Tehran. Fox News later reported that American officials believed Khamenei died along with somewhere between 5 and 10 other senior Iranian officials in that same strike. One of Khamenei's top advisors, Ali Shamkhani, who had survived an earlier round of Israeli strikes months before, was killed on the exact same day as Khamenei. This was not the first time the United States and Israel had struck Iran's nuclear program. Months earlier, in June 2025, American forces carried out a shorter operation known as Midnight Hammer, a 37-hour campaign against 3 of Iran's key nuclear enrichment sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan, that temporarily set back the program without triggering a full-scale war. That earlier round of fighting is often referred to as the 12-Day War, since Israel and Iran traded strikes for roughly 12 days before a shaky truce took hold. When Iran responded to that earlier campaign by resuming its nuclear work at a faster pace and formally withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in January 2026, American officials said leaked intelligence assessments pointed to Iran being only months away from a working weapon. That assessment, combined with months of failed diplomacy, stretching back to the start of the Trump administration, became the public justification for launching a far larger operation just weeks later. Losing Khamenei on day one changed the entire shape of the war overnight. Iran's government had to answer an urgent question almost immediately, with no clear successor named in advance. Someone still needed to be in charge of the country while missiles were still flying overhead. The country left without a leader. Iran had only faced this exact situation once before in its modern history. The position of supreme leader has existed since the 1979 revolution, and only one man, Ali Khamenei himself, had ever held it before his death, having taken over from Ayatollah Khomeini back in 1989. Nobody currently living in Iran had ever gone through the actual process of replacing a sitting supreme leader. The Iranian constitution has a built-in answer for exactly this kind of emergency. Under Article 111, when the office of supreme leader is vacant, a three-person interim leadership council temporarily takes over the powers of the position until a permanent replacement is chosen. On the day after Khamenei's death, that council was formed, including President Masoud Pezeshkian, Judiciary Chief Gholam Hossein Mohseni Ejei, and Senior Cleric Ayatollah Alireza Arafi. The job of actually picking a permanent supreme leader falls to a body called the Assembly of Experts, a group of 88 elected clerics whose candidates must first be approved by Iran's Guardian Council. Because Khamenei had spent decades shaping both of those bodies, almost nobody expected the process to produce a surprising or reform-minded outcome. About a week after the strikes that killed him, the Assembly of Experts made its choice. Iran named Mojtaba Khamenei, the 56-year-old son of Ali Khamenei, as the country's new supreme leader on March 8, 2026. Mojtaba had never held elected office, but he had spent years building close ties with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and had long been considered a likely successor inside Iran's inner political circles, even though his own father had reportedly expressed discomfort in the past with the idea of power passing directly from father to son. Born in Mashhad in September 1969, Mojtaba trained as a cleric at the Qom Seminary and spent time in the Basij paramilitary force before eventually becoming his father's most trusted aide and gatekeeper. Political analysts noted that his appointment signaled continuity rather than reform, since Mojtaba was widely seen as sharing his father's hardline instincts. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and Iran's regular armed forces both quickly pledged their backing to the new leader within hours of the announcement. President Pezeshkian publicly welcomed the choice, calling it a sign of national unity in the middle of the country's worst crisis in decades. Outside analysts read it differently, describing the pick as a signal that Iran's hardline factions intended to keep tight control of the government rather than open the door to negotiation. With a new leader now technically in place, the actual fighting on the ground was still far from finished. The war spreads across the region. Iran did not stay quiet after the opening strikes. In the days that followed, the country launched hundreds of retaliatory missiles and thousands of drones at targets across the Middle East, hitting Israel directly and also striking American military infrastructure in nearby Gulf countries. According to the defense research group Hudson Institute, Iran fired more ballistic missiles during this conflict than it had fired during the entire 12-day war back in June 2025. Oil and shipping quickly became one of the biggest flashpoints of the war. The Strait of Hormuz, a narrow waterway that normally carries about 1/5 of the world's oil supply, saw commercial traffic drop by more than 90% once the fighting began. The United Arab Emirates reported intercepting more than 200 incoming ballistic missiles, stopping the vast majority of them, though a small number still got through and caused damage on the ground. By late March, the conflict widened even further. Iran's allies in Yemen, the Houthi movement, had reached a separate ceasefire with the United States back in 2025, related to their earlier attacks on Red Sea shipping. On March 28, 2026, the Houthis broke that quiet period and launched missiles and drones toward Israel, opening an entirely new front in a war that had already spread well beyond Iran's own borders. The financial costs climbed just as fast as the military footprint. By early March, the Pentagon told Congress that the first 6 days of Operation Epic Fury alone had already cost more than $11 billion, an amount that came out to roughly $1.9 billion every single day. Insurance costs for any company operating in the Middle East spiked sharply, while defense contractor stock prices climbed on expectations of a wave of new military orders tied to the conflict. Oil markets swung wildly week to week, and gold and silver prices climbed as investors looked for safer places to put their money while the fighting continued with no clear end date in sight. The war had clearly grown far beyond a single strike on a single country within weeks. Every part of the region, and a good chunk of the global economy, now had some stake in how it ended. What happened next, inside Iran's own government, made that outcome even harder to predict. The toll the war actually took. Numbers from an active war are always hard to pin down while the fighting is still happening, but several figures became widely reported as the conflict dragged on through March and April. According to Britannica, the 2 months of fighting under Operation Epic Fury left thousands of people dead across Iran, Lebanon, Israel, and the Gulf Arab states, with millions more displaced from their homes. Cost tracking groups placed the total price tag for the American side alone in the tens of billions of dollars, with a running cost of close to $2 billion every single day during the most intense fighting in early March. Inside Iran, the loss of so much senior leadership in a single night created ripple effects that went well beyond just picking a new supreme leader. Trump told reporters that roughly 49 senior regime and military officials were killed during the opening phase of the campaign alone, describing Iran's government as having lost 2 full levels of leadership in one strike. There is no serious dispute that the opening night of Operation Epic Fury inflicted damage on Iran's government that the country had never experienced in the modern era. That damage is the actual reason people started searching for old warnings in the first place, cartoon or otherwise. A death in a power vacuum of that size was always going to send people looking for some kind of explanation. The next place a lot of them looked was straight at the public reaction to the news itself. The world reacts. News of Khamenei's death spread almost instantly, and reactions split sharply depending on where in the world people were watching from. Protesters gathered outside the Israeli consulate in Istanbul, holding pictures of Khamenei within a day of the news being confirmed. Inside Iran, state media eventually confirmed the death after initially staying silent, and mourners appeared at public displays honoring the fallen leader in cities well beyond Iran's own borders. American media coverage of Khamenei's death drew its own controversy at home. The Washington Post published an obituary describing Khamenei as having a bushy white beard and an easy smile, calling him a more avuncular figure in public than his predecessor. The framing drew immediate pushback from lawmakers and commentators who felt the language downplayed decades of human rights abuses tied to his rule. Financial markets outside the region reacted with the kind of volatility that usually follows a sudden, unexpected, regime-altering event. Analysts covering both traditional and cryptocurrency markets published guidance throughout March, trying to help investors understand what a prolonged Iran war might mean for oil-dependent economies. None of that market anxiety had anything to do with a cartoon joke from 1996, but it shaped the backdrop against which the viral Simpsons claim kept spreading. People searching for any sense of certainty in a chaotic news cycle are often drawn toward the comfort of a pattern, even a fake one. With the war now a genuine global story rather than a regional one, both sides eventually needed a way out. That path took most of the spring to actually come together. The fighting finally slows down. By early April 2026, both sides had reached what officials on both sides described as a fragile ceasefire, though the fighting did not stop cleanly all at once. The Trump administration told Congress that formal hostilities against Iran had ended, even as isolated missile and drone attacks continued to hit shipping lanes and targets in the United Arab Emirates in the weeks that followed. On April 8th, the White House released a statement declaring the operation a clear victory, saying Operation Epic Fury had met its military goals in just 38 days. According to the administration, the campaign destroyed more than 85% of Iran's defense industrial base, including the large majority of its ballistic missiles, mobile missile launchers, and long-range attack drones. Officials framed the outcome as proof that the operation's original goals, ending Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon and crippling its offensive missile capability, had both been achieved. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described the results as the most decisive campaign of his tenure, tying it back to earlier operations against Iran, going back to the killing of Qasem Soleimani years before. Even with the ceasefire technically in place, the situation in the Strait of Hormuz stayed tense for weeks afterward. In early May, the United States launched a follow-up operation called Project Freedom, aimed at escorting merchant ships safely through the strait after continued Iranian attacks on shipping. The operation ran for a single day, from May 4th to May 5th, and involved American forces sinking several Iranian boats while taking damage themselves when a French cargo ship was hit during the fighting. On May 5th, Trump announced the operation had been paused by what he called mutual agreement, citing progress in ongoing negotiations with Iran. That same day, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters at the White House that Operation Epic Fury itself, the main combat phase of the war that had started back in February, was officially over. Rubio described the American military's role from that point forward as shifting to a defensive posture, focused on keeping the Strait of Hormuz open for commercial traffic rather than continuing offensive strikes inside Iran. Hegseth backed up that timeline, insisting the ceasefire reached the previous month remained intact despite the occasional flare-up around the strait. By most official measures, the main phase of the war lasted from February 28 to May 5, 2026, a stretch of roughly 2 months. The human and economic toll was severe on every side, with thousands of people killed across Iran, Lebanon, Israel, and Gulf Arab states, and millions of people displaced across the wider region. With the shooting mostly stopped and a new Iranian leader now firmly in place, attention online quickly shifted away from the war itself and back toward the 30-year-old cartoon joke that people insisted had somehow called the whole thing in advance. What fact-checkers and Simpsons writers actually say. This is not the first time people have claimed The Simpsons predicted a major world event, and the show's own writers have addressed the pattern more than once. Longtime executive producer Al Jean has weighed in on similar claims before, most notably in 2022, when fans compared a 1998 episode called Simpson Tide, where Homer accidentally fires a submarine captain into Russian waters, to Russia's actual invasion of Ukraine. Jean said the resemblance was sad, rather than mysterious, explaining that he had lived through decades of tension with the Soviet Union, and simply assumed that kind of aggression was likely to resurface eventually. Former showrunner Bill Oakley has made a similar point about the show more broadly, arguing that after producing hundreds of episodes across nearly 4 decades, some coincidences are bound to happen purely because of how many episodes exist and how often global politics tends to repeat familiar patterns. Two Bad Neighbors in particular was written as a joke about how quickly Americans forget the specifics of old political anger, not as a forecast of who would actually be in charge of Iran 3 decades later. Several fact-checking outlets looked into the viral Iran claim directly while the war was still active. Sunday Guardian Live reviewed the circulating posts in early April 2026 and found no confirmed episode or actual evidence that The Simpsons predicted a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran, concluding that most of the claims trace back to fan theories and simple misreadings of old dialogue. Snopes, which maintains an entire ongoing collection of debunked Simpsons prediction claims, has repeatedly found that most viral prediction posts either stretch an existing joke far beyond its original meaning or invent a scene that never aired at all. A separate rumor that spread during the same period, claiming President Trump had compared the size of his eventual funeral crowd to Khamenei's, turned out to have started as satire from a well-known comedy writer named Andy Borowitz, and had no basis in anything Trump actually said. That pattern of stretching old jokes to fit new headlines has shown up again and again over the years. The Iran claim is simply the newest version of something that has happened many times before, with completely different topics. And every one of those earlier versions ended the exact same way once someone actually checked the source. This kind of claim keeps coming back. Viral claims about The Simpsons predicting the future are not new, and they rarely hold up once anyone actually checks the source material. During the 2018 and 2022 World Cups, fans repeatedly shared an old episode claiming it predicted a Mexico versus Portugal final, even though the episode in question never named a year, a bracket, or even showed a finished match. Neither tournament ended with that matchup, and the claim quietly faded away each time, only to resurface again years later once a new tournament made the coincidence feel timely again. The show has been credited with dozens of similar claims over the decades. A 2000 episode called Bart to the Future showed a character referencing a President Trump years before Trump ever ran for office, and that single line has been stretched to cover 3 separate Trump campaigns, even though the scene only gestured at a vague future timeline. A 2015 short called Trump-tastic Voyage has been credited with predicting Trump's 2016, 2020, and 2024 campaigns, even though the short also references a 2028 campaign that fans conveniently leave out whenever they share the clip. A 1992 episode called Lisa the Greek has also been cited for decades as a Super Bowl prediction machine, since it aired just days before the actual Super Bowl and happened to correctly guess the winning team using a plot about Homer relying on Lisa's betting instincts. Fans have tried to apply that same lucky guess logic to other seasons with mixed results, since the show has also picked wrong winners plenty of times without anyone remembering those misses. Fake content has made this problem worse in recent years. In the summer of 2025, a video claiming Trump would suffer a heart attack in public spread widely under the banner of an old forgotten Simpsons episode. No such episode exists anywhere in the show's 40-season history, and an AI detection tool found the images in the viral video were generated by artificial intelligence rather than pulled from any real broadcast. Even unrelated topics get pulled into the same pattern once a big news event breaks. Early in 2026, fans pointed to a 2012 episode called Them Robot, about a nuclear plant owner replacing his workers with robots, as a prediction of job losses tied to artificial intelligence. Around the same time, a decades-old episode called Margin Chains about a fictional Osaka flu shipped into Springfield from Japan got compared to a real flu variant spreading through several countries in early 2026. None of these connections involve anything more specific than a broad theme the show had already touched on, simply because those themes tend to repeat in real life on their own. The Iran claim fits neatly into this same pattern. A show that has aired more than 700 episodes across nearly 4 decades was always going to say the word Ayatollah at some point. And the fact that a real Ayatollah later died in a real war does not turn an old joke into a forecast. What makes this particular claim different from most of the others is simply how quickly the real-world events lined up with a headline-making word, and that timing is exactly what kept the old clips circulating for months after the war actually began. Verdict. Here is where things actually stand. A 1996 Simpsons episode made a 15-second joke about a t-shirt mocking a made-up Ayatollah. It never mentioned Khamenei, a war, or the year 2026. What made this year different is that a real war between Iran, Israel, and the United States actually broke out, and a real supreme leader really was killed. The war started on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion, killing Khamenei in the opening strikes. Iran fired back for weeks, the Houthis joined in, and shipping through the Strait of Hormuz was disrupted. Khamenei's son Mojtaba took over as supreme leader about a week later, and the main fighting ended by May 5th, 2026. None of that came from a cartoon. A joke written 30 years earlier never had the power to name a war or a death, and it did not do so here either. The clip just felt believable because the words lined up, and once people watched the full scene again, the theory fell apart the same way it always has. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next one.